Hello. Hold on. Hello. Oh, I know what's going on. Hold on. All right, let me fix this real quick. Where are we? All right, there we go. Sorry about that. All right. What's good, y'all? It's your humble Ronin here with another Ronin reaction. We're continuing our listen through to the Whitney Webb interview. If you want to hear my thoughts about the recent event that happened last week, check out my live stream regarding Charlie Kirk. So we're just going to get right on into it.
Imagine being able to build.
I know a lot has been going on throughout the week, well, last weekend into this weekend, or into this week. So I'm just going to, like I said, keep on talking about this Whitney Webb interview. A lot of interesting stuff in here. I want to, change the pace a little bit from all the ongoing chaos that we're currently experiencing. So that's why we're just going to continue with this Whitney Webb thing. If anything in this interview comes up in relation to the recent incident with Charlie Kirk and his passing, I'll definitely bring it up. But we'll try to just keep it pretty mellow. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. If you want to hear some of my conspiracy theories, so to speak, or my thoughts and speculations, check out my Charlie Kirk live stream. But let's just see how it goes. Like I said, we're going to do another 30 minutes or so. I was a little late, had some technical problems. So maybe a little bit longer. We might go till like 1:15, 1:30. We'll see. But let's get into it.
You need someone as a front to help gather that intelligence.
Yeah, and Epstein not only had close ties to Bill Casey, Roy Cohn, and all of these guys, but was also a known blackmailer. So that might be where it started. How do you really want to influence politics and powerful figures in New York?
You need intelligence.
You need intelligence, yeah.
You need someone as a front to help gather that intelligence.
Yeah, and Epstein was already well connected to all sorts of networks, kind of like Roy Cohn, straddling both worlds to an extent.
When you become a Mossad agent, how does that work?
What do we
know?
mean?
Like, you become an agent? You become...
Well, so there's
yourself?
agents, there's assets, there's all sorts of things you can do for the agency that taps you on the shoulder, as it were.
But are you tapped on the shoulder with incentives or with threats, or can it be both?
I'm sure it can be both.
And at that time, Epstein was probably incentives?
Well, I think he was already enmeshed in the Maxwell world. And Maxwell, again, is one of these figures that straddles organized crime and powerful business and powerful banking, and had already been working for Israeli intelligence for some time.
And so he maybe introduced Epstein, said, he's one of us, we can trust him.
Well, that's what he did. That's what,
yeah.
In the mid-'80s, that was already a done deal. But Epstein was also involved with U.S. intelligence, absolutely. But again, the Iran-Contra nexus, which is basically kind of what this is a melding of U.S. and Israeli intelligence, and also figures that are assets for either both agencies or more,
I mean,
like Robert Maxwell wasn't just involved with Israeli intelligence. He had involvement with British intelligence, Russian intelligence. I mean, he was kind of, he had his hand in a lot of pies, we'll put it that way. And Epstein absolutely was a person with their hand in a lot of pies, especially in the 1980s.
Is the Israeli intelligence and the U.S. intelligence pretty much one of the same? Is it a very good...
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. James Jesus Angleton was one of the first CIA counterintelligence chiefs. There's a huge statue to him in Tel Aviv thanking him for all he did. And there's been documents that have come forth since basically showing that he was elevating Israeli interests over American interests, which has happened time and again in U.S.
Of
politics.
course.
That's what the neocons are known for, right?
Mm.
And you have someone like Bill Casey, too, who was very close to figures intimately enmeshed with Israeli intelligence, like Bruce Rappaport, for example, one of his best friends. And just, you have all these people having rather insidious business relationships, even why, Casey's CIA director. And then you have this, what I mentioned earlier about sort of organized crime being an element here, because organized crime is transnational, right? And so this national crime syndicate that I've mentioned a few times is also a transnational thing. So Bruce Rappaport, who, is an Israeli nominally, he'd come to visit Bill Casey when he was CIA director. They go golfing together. His chauffeur would be a mob guy, an American mob guy, and there's a lot of examples of, the organized crime being all over the place. So some of my more recent work on the broader Epstein network focuses on Italy and some of the people there, and they seem to really all come from this nexus that was exposed in the 80s, this P.3 lodge or propaganda do, it was called. It was a huge scandal in Italy. A lot of people, it involved a lot of politicians, bankers, very powerful people that were basically meeting in secret. It was labeled a subversive organization by the government. It was operating as a Freemason lodge. And it was connected to the collapse of several prominent banks. One of the main guy that was going to go to trial for all of this, Michel Sindona, was under 24/7 police watch to make sure he wasn't popped off. They were inspecting his food, everything, and someone slipped cyanide in his coffee and he died. So,
Okay.
but anyway, the biggest, the guy that came out of P2 that ended up becoming very powerful and famous after the scandal is Silvio Berlusconi.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even the current government of Italy is very affiliated with Berlusconi. But
he liked his bunga parties, didn't he?
Yeah, well, so when he was prime minister, he had these bunga parties, as they were called. And one of the main, she was a teenager at the time, 17. She was a focal point of it. I think her nickname in the press was Ruby or something. It's remembered as Rubygate. She got caught stealing something while all of this was going on, like a theft from a mall or something like that. And then when she was being held, Berlusconi, who's prime minister at the time, calls and lies and said it was the prime minister of Egypt's daughter and to let her go or it would create a diplomatic crisis. It wasn't true.
Isn't it wild?
And that's how it all starts to kind of unravel for him.
Yeah,
but he has historic ties. To mafiosos and all sorts of really shady stuff. And I mean, he's a real character, to say the least.
But it's wild that he is a prime minister of Italy.
Yeah.
Would be involved in such shady...
No one remembers that. Yeah. Yeah. So...
But it's the idea that you're the prime minister. You're exposing yourself to one of the hugest scandals that you could go through as a prime minister, but you do it because you must feel like you can operate with impunity. Well,
yeah, absolutely. Because by that point, I mean, he'd been in politics for ages. He controlled Italian media. He was the father of Italian broadcasting. I mean, he's an extremely powerful dude. He did get away. I mean, he basically got away with that too.
Yeah, but he's really operated like a mob boss.
Yeah, I would argue that. Well, P2, which Berlusconi was a member of, and it was on paper instrumental to his rise to become a super billionaire and later politician. It was part of this nexus I referenced earlier as it relates to Operation Gladio. The Italian side of the National Crime Syndicate comes to Italy, Charles Luciano, and helps set up that operation and this nexus that involved American intelligence, the mafia, the Vatican, and a powerful Italian businessmen and politicians and diplomats.
There's this layer through everything. There's multiple layers. There is a layer.
Well, there's multiple scandals that have all been memory hold, and there's been no accountability. So, I bring up a scandal like that, and people are like, "Whoa, what?" But in a world where things make sense, that would be known about, and accountability would have happened, and would have been like, "We're never doing that again."
Well, I remember the whole when the bunga party stuff came out, and like, oh well, this.
Oh, I'm talking about P2.
Oh, P2. Okay, but what I'm saying is on these layers, there's through all of this, there is a layer of organized crime,
Yeah.
a layer of intelligence agencies, a layer of big business and rich people,
Yeah.
and then this other layer of young girls.
Yeah, they like teens.
They do like teens.
Mm-hmm.
They do like teens, but it's a layer. All these layers exist.
Mm-hmm. Yes. They pop up over and over again. I mean, I don't know. Again, this is what I tried to show, the redundancy of how this keeps happening, the same names, the same people, and also the same cycles of impunity and no accountability.
Can you make sense of it?
Well, I tried to in the books.
Not sense as in piecing the piece together. The logic of how we exist in a world where this is just happening.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so
I think this is an interesting interesting part of the conversation here, because it kind of coincides a lot with some of the final thoughts and statements and perspectives that Charlie Kirk was having towards a particular Middle Eastern nation. And it's funny how he began to question the narrative, because that certain nations, he started becoming like, he started realizing that this nation was acting with impunity towards many other nations, including the United States. And you think about him, he began questioning that publicly, especially when you look into who was funding Turning Point. And it all kind of starts to coincide with one another. You know, him really questioning about Epstein, Charlie Kirk, and really trying to figure out what was his connection to intelligence agencies, how it connected to the Middle Eastern, a specific nation in the Middle East and their intelligence agency. How did it all coincides? And him having this kind of revelation, it adds to the conversation that you're seeing online in Twitter, where people are genuinely asking these questions, because you look at what he was, the questions that he was asking in terms of his interviews towards Ben Shapiro and other people, and Patrick Ben-David, that viral clip that's been going around that got taken off of YouTube, actually. You should look into that. You start wondering, well, who's really responsible for Charlie Kirk's death? Is it really his ideological debates that he was having, or was it something more? And I think this conversation that Whitney Webb is having is even more prevalent now, considering the recent events and the passing of Charlie Kirk.
So, perception management is how we exist in this, and don't really know. Sure. Well, the same guy that made PR is the same guy that made propaganda. It was Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew, who basically weaponized psychology against the whole world, because PR is propaganda for corporations, right? And so he developed both jointly.
Okay. So back to Epstein. How do we get from a tap on the shoulder, friends with Maxwell, to this point where he's now in with Clintons and Trumps, with all this like high society of US.
Maxwell dies in 91, and that's the first year that Ghislaine and Epstein are, seen out publicly dating. But Epstein had several girlfriends in this period, and he took many of them on his Clinton White House visits, which began in 1993. The first one was not Mark Middleton; it was Robert Rubin that was inviting him. And Robert Rubin,
is he dead?
No, but his deputy was Larry Summers, who, as we all know now, had a very cozy Epstein relationship. And, Robert Rubin and the repeal of Glass-Steagall, it was Rubin had left to go work for Sandy Weill, and that's the reason why Glass-Steagall had to go away, so that Citigroup could merge.
That was a Clinton policy, right?
Well, the repeal of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Larry Summers was also a Treasury Secretary under Clinton. But at the time Rubin effected that Epstein visit, he wasn't Treasury Secretary yet, because I believe Clinton had 3 Treasury Secretaries, Rubin and Summers being the latter 2. The first one was Lloyd Benson. And so at that time, Rubin was head of the National Economic Council. But he had previously been head of one of the top people at Goldman Sachs. And Goldman Sachs was one of the main banks involved in Robert Maxwell's funny money stuff involving the pension funds, by the way. So I wonder how Robert Rubin and Epstein could have possibly met, but it might be somewhere in there, because Goldman Sachs was Maxwell's banker.
All right, so the Clintons, the connection, would this be the Israeli connection saying we want you to get closer to the Clintons? Is this himself just wanting to get closer, just elevating his place in society?
Well, Ari Ben Menashe, who I mentioned earlier, said that his understanding was that the sexual blackmail stuff of Epstein was done for Israel with the purpose of blackmailing Bill Clinton. And a lot of the other politicians that are, accused by Epstein, prominent Epstein accusers, or otherwise named in documents, things like that, are people like Bill Richardson or George Mitchell. They're both Democrats. So if you're Israel and you're trying to influence American policy, it would actually probably behoove you to largely blackmail Democrats, because Democrats are the ones that, at least in turn, they posture anyway, of being more sympathetic to Palestinians than Republicans. So you don't really need to blackmail Republicans to take your side when it comes.
Well, you don't really need to blackmail Republicans, because most Republicans are already siding with Israel in terms of the political climate that's going on in the Middle East in regards to Palestine. You can even, look at Marco Rubio. I mean, Charlie Kirk has just, been assassinated, and then the next thing you know, he's at the Wailing Wall. And then I'm sure some of you who are tuning in, make sure you hit that like button. You're aware about some of the recent proposed bills that would essentially strip American citizens of their passport if they criticize a certain country in the Middle East. So and also the day of his assassination, they voted no to releasing the Epstein files of data. I guess you could say the Epstein data. It's a more appropriate way of putting it. Who was really advocating for the release of this information, and who was questioning certain intelligence agencies and their relationship to this. I mean, it's kind of right there for you. It's, as much as people like to joke about the ignorance of the American mind. I mean, they're stupid, but they're not this stupid, not anymore. I mean, after the pandemic, I think a lot of people, even the laymen, have woken up a little bit, somewhat. And I'm not talking about from a political standpoint, whether you're left or right. I'm just talking about from an individual, people who are not caught up in the cult mindset of the politics.
Comes to negotiations related to the Israel-Palestine conflict. And what's interesting is, there's a couple other figures that ended up having unusual relationships with Epstein that were related to some of those big agreements between Israel and Palestine during the Clinton era. So one of them was later on head of the International Peace Institute, which Epstein donated a lot of money to. But he also gave personal loans and other things to this guy who had to step down. His name, I think, was, I don't know how to pronounce it, but his last name was Rod Larson. And he was one of the lead negotiators on the Oslo Peace Accords in the early 90s, as an example. And George Mitchell was known as a negotiator involved in this kind of stuff too. So it seems like a lot of targeting was kind of done there. And also allegedly there's been a lot of work done. I forget the journalist's name, David Harbour, I think it is. Anyway, he went over tons of documents and other things and basically showed that the Monica Lewinsky thing, Israel knew about it first, and that there was a lot of pressing of Clinton on that point by Netanyahu to get something more favorable for Israel during negotiations then. And also you have figures like Ehud Barak and another member of the aforementioned mega group, Michael Steinhardt, being instrumental in pressuring Clinton to pardon Mark Rich in the final days of his time as president. It was one of those very last-minute pardons that are usually pretty controversial, and Clinton's not the only one to do that. Trump has done some of them, and pretty much every recent president has controversial pardons made at the last moment, like Biden's, where Fauci and his own family and things like that. So it's become, unfortunately, a pretty common practice. But Ehud Barak was, is reported to have screamed at Clinton about pardoning Mark Rich. So, former prime minister and defense minister of Israel screaming at the U.S. president, telling him what to do, and then he does it. Interesting.
It's a useful tool for a president on the final days.
Yeah, so it's important to point out though that Mark Rich, he was a commodities guy, and he was a fugitive from the U.S. for a long time because he disobeyed U.S. sanctions and was selling oil, or engaged in commodity sales to basically benefit Israel, but was engaging in transactions with Iran and other companies that were on the naughty list of the U.S. government at the time. But he was a very well-known and it's very well-documented asset of Mossad and Israeli intelligence, and had a lot of overlap with that, and a lot of people that worked for him were on Israeli intelligence payroll. And he also had a lot of, his company Glencore, I believe now is Nathaniel Rothschild is one of the main people there and has been for some time. So who's the new head of the British Rothschild.
Shout out to Matarai.
So
thank you for stopping by, man. Appreciate it.
Times, and Bill Clinton was listed on his plane a lot.
Well, so the plane rides that we really know about with Clinton and Epstein happened after Clinton left office. But
Okay.
Epstein was meeting at the White House while Clinton was in office, and he was bringing women with him. And maybe he met Bill Clinton. We don't really know because there hasn't been a lot of transparency. We just know the people who were signing off, the people in the White House that signed off on the meeting from the visitor logs. So like Jeffrey Epstein is coming, someone writes it down, and then they say, who was the person that authorized them to come, right? So some of those meetings could have involved Clinton. We don't really know. But it's very possible. But what's interesting, all we can really look at are the people that we know he was meeting with, who signed off on it. So like I mentioned, the first one was Rubin, and then after that, almost all of them are Mark Middleton.
Who later ended up.
Yes, dead under very unusual circumstances, to say the least.
So what was Clinton's connection after he left office? Why was he spending...
Oh, because Epstein was basically helping him set up the Clinton Philanthropies. That's the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton Global Initiative, the Clinton Health Access Initiative, which is what a lot of those flights to Africa were about. And that's a lot of the people that were in Clinton's network, like Doug Band and a woman, I forget her name, but she was the lady that basically created on paper the Clinton Health Access Initiative and what a lot of the Africa trip was about. That included people like Chris Tucker and Kevin Spacey and some of the more infamous flights that are known about.
Hold on, so was he taking the Lolita Express? It's like they're laughing at us. Were they taking
That's the nickname for it, yeah.
Would they? Oh, it wasn't. Sorry, I assumed that was.
No, that's not the official name.
Oh, I thought it was.
No,
I
it's
was
just
like,
his
they're
private
laughing at us.
plane.
Yeah.
I don't think it had.
So he was taking that plane to Africa.
Yeah. And he also went to Asia with Epstein.
But it's like it wasn't a great plane, right? It was a crappy 727.
I don't remember the
I think it's
exact make
727.
and model, but yeah.
I'm a bit of a plane geek. You can get better.
Okay, well then you know better than me.
I think it's a 727.
The planes, as it relates to Epstein, I'm most aware of are Southern Air Transport, which we should definitely talk about.
Well, tell me about that.
Well, because it relates to the Middleton stuff.
Okay.
So Middleton, at the time Epstein is meeting with him, is involved in this scandal that sort of revolves around Clinton's re-election campaign in 96, I guess, but it is much more than that. It's remembered today as a campaign finance scandal, where basically People that were not citizens of the U.S. were funneling a ton of money to the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, illegally.
Well, that's funny. Wasn't that just happening? Weren't they finding that the DNC was getting funny money through those special interest groups? And hey, wasn't there that New Jersey Democrat who got gold plates and money from Egypt, and he got arrested, and they were finding like gold bars in his shoes and hundreds and thousands of dollars in like coat pockets and stuff like that. And then wasn't like Sam Bankman-Fried allegedly funding money through the DNC through his cryptocurrency, and how much of that was probably being funded through various nations? Huh. That's funny.
And that was absolutely happening. But a lot more was going on. A lot of these businessmen, they were Chinese, and they were all trying to get access, most of them, to Ron Brown, the Commerce Secretary. He's the one that we brought up earlier because he died in the suspicious plane crash, along with the department, the sub-department in the Department of Commerce that was most targeted with this group, which is the ITA. I think that's International Trade Administration. Pretty much the top staff of that department was taken out with Ron Brown in one go. And the guy at the airport that was allegedly responsible, the navigator, was found dead of an alleged self-inflicted shotgun wound to the chest like 2 days after. And Ron Brown had a wound in his head when he was found in the plane crash that is, if you look at it objectively, it's a bullet hole, and that was not inflicted by the crash. No survivors.
So on this podcast, you are definitely hearing me talk about Bitcoin a lot. Well, why?
Financier, one of the main nexus implicated. Congress tried to investigate it. They were stonewalled by every agency. It was crazy. Mark Middleton pleaded the fifth when he was brought in, I think, almost 30 times. No one wanted to say anything about this, and it's been extremely memory hold. So why was Epstein meeting with Middleton while Middleton was a central figure in all of this?
Huh, that sounds kind of familiar. Doesn't that sound like something going on with like the Epstein files, and how like nobody wanted to talk about it, and like Trump said it didn't exist, but there's like footage of him talking about how it exists? Didn't Pam Bondi say they had troves of information, but then she said they didn't have anything? Huh. That's weird. It's almost like they just do things in cycles with different generations, with different alternatives, but the same mechanics, just updated, amplified, and just formulated to fit the current state of affairs.
So really one of the main nexuses of Chinagate aren't Chinese, they're Indonesian, they're the Riyadi family. And the Riyadi family had a lot of business interests also in the United States, and they were very close to a financier.
Wait a minute, the Riyadi family? The Riyadh? Wait a minute. Is WWE host? Oh my gosh.
Based in Arkansas, named Jackson Stevens, who is very important to the rise of the Clintons as a political dynasty. So that's important there. On the other side of it, the Riyadis also were very close to BCCI Hong Kong. And when BCCI was imploding, they tried to rescue specifically that Hong Kong branch, and had a lot of connections to sort of those networks there. They try and rope in Chinese government-linked firms to help them rescue it. And that they don't rescue it, but they continue. They basically make joint ventures with the Chinese government. And so the Riyadis and a lot of people who worked for them that were Chinese nationals end up being the people that are the Chinese figures in Chinagate, but they're really working for this Indonesian guy that's in bed with the Chinese government. So it's a little broader than just Chinagate. And essentially, what I would argue is going on is that sensitive U.S. military technology was being given to the Chinese military in exchange for Chinese weapons being smuggled really into the United States. So why would they do that? Well, the U.S. was the Chinese, the number one spot for Chinese weapons purchases up until they were banned by Clinton. And part of that was an exchange to get
Banned by Clinton and rebranded by Barack Obama. Operation Fast and Furious. Sending Chinese guns through the cartels into Chicago.
Get Congress to grant China most favorable nation status for trade, because they didn't have that before and they wanted that. And it was a major impediment to the U.S.-Chinese economic relationship that exists today. Because if you aren't an MFN or most favored nation, it's much harder for you to establish that kind of economic dependency, really, which is what it's developed into. Everything is made in China. It wouldn't have been as easy to sort of establish that. But anyway, they still wanted to sell the weapons to somebody. The Chinese weapons market lost its number one customer. So how were the weapons getting in? Around the same time, Jeffrey Epstein, who has power of attorney over all of Leslie Wexner's affairs from 93 on, and Wexner's business interests start basically negotiating the relocation of this airline called Southern Air Transport from Miami, where it had been located, to Columbus, Ohio, where the Limited and Wexner's business interests are based. And prior to this, the Southern Air Transport was known for being a CIA-owned airline that later became a CIA de facto owned airline that was the main airline in Iran-Contra that was moving weapons and drugs between the U.S. and Latin America, with a major node in their trajectory in that scandal being Mena, Arkansas, at the time Bill Clinton was governor. And there's a lot of, talking about the Clinton kill list, as it's called. A lot of those earlier names on that are related to Mena, specifically. But anyway, it relocated to Columbus. Instead of going from North America to South America or Central America, it starts going to Hong Kong. And people in Ohio's government at the time basically start...
That reminds me. Hotep. Anime Nika. That reminds me. You guys remember the opioid crisis? Hey, didn't it turn out that all those opioids were getting manufactured in China and then sent to Mexico to the cartels and then brought into the United States? You guys remember that? Huh. So you give the whites the drugs and you give the blacks the guns. Well, the poor blacks the drugs, the guns, and the poor whites the drugs. Isn't that funny, right? And then they want to, and isn't that funny too, right? So the drugs are being manufactured in China, sent to the cartels, and then brought in through the border into the United States. But the United States government is currently telling us that Venezuela is a drug cartel nation, when in fact they have some of the largest deposits of lithium ion and oil reserves in the world. Huh. Look one way, catch you the other. It's funny how it all plays out, right? Really funny how it all plays out.
calling it organized crime links. One, I think the Ohio Inspector General reportedly called it the Mayor Lansky run. People there knew that there was some shady crime stuff going on. And as I mentioned earlier, there's this document of Columbus PD linking Wexner to organized crime before this happens. So the main Chinese companies, arms companies involved, we have one called Poly Technologies that's tied directly to the Chinese military, and the Norinco, who I mentioned earlier because they had been in this joint venture with Douglas Lease from 1983 on, which is when their profits start to skyrocket. They start selling, becoming the main weapons supplier to Iran and all sorts of governments around the world. Mostly the third world, but like I mentioned earlier, they had become a major supplier to the U.S. until this move was made in the early Clinton administration. And this is really, I would argue, part of a much larger scandal here, or appears to be, because if you're familiar with Gary Webb and the Dark Alliance about crack cocaine exploding and all of that involving CIA and the Iran-Contra network, if you look, so the CIA director at the time came to one of those communities to talk and basically be like, nothing to see here. And there's a lady that stands up and is like, enough about the drugs. Where are all the guns coming from? Because guns were being flooded into the Pacific. And these same networks were caught by the FBI trafficking weapons into California during the same period of time. They busted it. It's called Operation Dragonfire, but the higher-ups were tipped off ahead of time and escaped. And so only like really low-lying people in the hierarchy of that operation ended up going to prison for it. And it's never been properly investigated at all. And a lot of really strange stuff is going on.
When are they ever properly investigated? None of these events, none of these operations, none of these false handkerchiefs, none of them are ever properly investigated. We still don't know anything about the shooter who attempted to kill President Donald Trump. We still don't know anything about that. The house was swept clean. Body was cremated without family's consent. Nothing. We don't know anything about him except one video of him in a BlackRock commercial. None of them. We don't know anything. We never get to find out anything. It's never properly investigated. Just right now, Kash Patel came out and claimed that apparently some of the evidence relating to Charlie Kirk's assassination has been destroyed. Who destroyed the evidence? How do you have the evidence and then it gets destroyed in your possession?
On sort of, if you look at that as a broader scandal. So you have weapons flooding these areas, you have drugs flooding these areas, and allegedly, you have hip-hop gangster rap being orchestrated by record companies for the benefit of private prisons. And why is that significant? Well, the Promise Software scandal I mentioned earlier is very complex again, but one of the main players in that is Wackenhut. And another one of the main players in that is MCA, the Music Corporation of America, which later, basically, its subsequent iterations come to dominate hip-hop in that period. And Wackenhut, which is now Geo Group, was then and still is now one of the main private prison companies in the U.S. And then Clinton passes the crime bill that, in 1994 that basically makes all of these things offenses and makes it much easier to fill the prisons.
So let me get this straight. You have one of the largest music companies in the country have personal stake in a private prison company, and they're the same music company that promoted gangster rap. Now, put your kufi ons for this one, but doesn't that sound like uh, the government aided in funding the largest music company in the country to then fund gangster rap, which promotes violence, drugs, degradation into a particular community, and then create laws that also allow them to use those very same songs to use in court against suspect gangsters who are also murderers? So you just have a system that pretty much just creates prison labor by promoting violence and drugs and degradation into a particular community in the hopes of gaining money and status and reputation, either through the records or at the end of a barrel of a gun. I'm just goofy on here, just a little hot take of mine. But it seems like maybe those speculations about, a lot of music icons being created and funded by the intelligence agencies to push certain types of agendas and lifestyles that then make it easier for the government to overreach on our personal rights and to then seed in potential false handkerchief events, MK Ultra train. You know what I mean. I think you guys out there are smart enough and self-aware enough to get what I'm saying. Yeah, it's a gangster prison funnel, essentially. That's essentially what they have. Shout out Jack Reeves. That's what they've created, a gangster prison funnel. They monetized the violence of music to not only suppress a certain populace of the nation, but also to make money off of the death via the songs and the actual violence that's enacted. That is fucking evil and crazy.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the companies that end up using prison labor around this time? Well, Leslie Wexner's Victoria's Secret is one.
Are they really?
And yep. Well, not anymore because it got found out, but in this period of time it was.
Where they pay like 17 cents an hour.
Mm-hmm. It's free slave labor.
Free slave
basically.
labor, yeah.
Yeah, and then another company that I believe still uses it is General Dynamics, which is Lester Crown's company. Lester Crown being one of the mega group guys. And then, some of the biggest corporations in the world. One of them is Walmart, which has longstanding ties to the Clinton family, the Waltons, and all of that. So it's very messed up and should be investigated. It has not been investigated. I mean, Gary Webb has essentially been vindicated since then, but he was smeared and attacked and ended up dying. Some people say suspiciously. His family denies that, and I'm not going to be the one to say definitively what happened. But obviously it's not like the network that engaged in all of the illegal activity in Iran-Contra, just they got caught and then all pardoned by Bill Barr and then just stopped doing what they were doing, That's not how this stuff works. It's just like BCCI. BCCI implodes and gets found out. The people using it and the people running it didn't just stop, At least the people pulling the strings. They need something else to service their interests in those ways. So they make something else,
At what point did Mark Middleton decide to hang himself and shoot himself in the chest at the same time?
It was 2022.
Oh, so
And
quite
so
recent.
it was well after the Chinagate stuff had presumably been forgotten about, but it was shortly after the Daily Mail actually was the outlet that did it, of all outlets, revealed the full extent of Epstein's visits to the White House and showed that most of his meetings were with Middleton. Because before that, it was thought to be only like, I think, 3 or 4 meetings, mostly about a White House fundraiser that Hillary Clinton was running that was also very suspect. I talk about that in my book. It was supposedly to redecorate the White House. It probably was not. But
where's the overlap with Trump? Because he was hanging out with Trump in
sure, but Trump, back in the 90s and
Yeah.
80s, he was like a Democrat. He was friends with the Clintons,
So
right?
it's just part of that crowd.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, the Epstein Trump thing, there's kind of different angles there, because when Clinton was president, it's not like Trump was in and around the White House then. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
Trump as a politician comes later. Trump was bailed out in the early 1990s by, Rothschild banking interests, the same banking interests that had brought Robert Maxwell to New York. They're on the same yacht. Roy Cohn is part of that network of that are, enmeshed with the people that Maxwell is hiring to advise him on how to best influence New York high society and DC politics. So and before that, Trump had in I think 87 taken de facto control of this company that was created as a CIA front and had years of being tied to the mob, called Resorts International. And he used that to kind of try and establish himself in Atlantic, New Jersey. At the time, they were trying to make Atlantic City the new Vegas, right?
He did, as I understand it, kick Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago, right, for being a bit weird and creepy.
Yeah, that's so there's conflicting stories again about why they parted ways. So Trump has now said it's because Epstein was poaching employees. The most famous poached employee is Virginia Giuffre, when she was like 15 or something like that. But there's also, it seems like their relationship soured because they were both trying to compete for the purchase of this Palm Beach property, this mansion. And then I believe Trump won, Epstein wanted it, and there was acrimony between them, and Trump sold it to some Russian or Ukrainian billionaire guy that then bulldozed it. Kind of a whole very suspect thing there. But, a lot of Trump's real estate interests, the Russiagate stuff, a lot of it was, looking at some of these shady Russian figures that had done real estate deals with Trump in the past, because Trump is a real estate guy before he was a politician. But a lot of those, were used to say, oh, he's owned by Putin. And if you look at those individuals, they go back to Simeon Mogilevich. They go back to the mobster guy that was close to Maxwell. And all these other people, and banked by Safras and the Bank of New York and all of this stuff. So, it seems to be this particular crowd that, they became very enmeshed with. And again, Trump was bailed out by Wilbur Ross and N.M. Rothschild when his Atlantic City stuff and, all of those efforts went haywire for him. And to paraphrase one of the bankers on that deal, they didn't rescue Trump because it made economic sense. They rescued him because his brand was valuable. And it obviously has been very valuable. But I think, if you want to talk about the Epstein-Trump relationship, a lot of people are like, oh, well, did Epstein have dirt on Trump? I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it doesn't really matter, because, the same people are kind of behind both of them. You know what I'm saying? The power structure that has enabled Trump from that point on is very similar to the Epstein Maxwell network. There's an extreme amount of overlap there.
So when did all the weird stuff started with the young girls being shipped around start? Because I feel like most of us understanding of the Epstein story starts really from the philanthropy, where he was trying to support Bill Gates' philanthropy. He was
most people are familiar with the early 2000s on.
We all know the backstory since, but it's kind of like we start to hear about him having meetings on the island.
But there's accusers from the 90s.
Sure.
I think the earliest is like 91 or 92. maybe I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert on every
Yeah, of
accuser of
course.
Epstein ever. I focus more on who was Epstein and what was he really up to besides sex trafficking, in addition to trying to delineate who were, what was the power structure that enabled Epstein to operate with impunity with respect to the sex trafficking as well. That's more my interest and focus.
Because like
Um,
the Bill Gates divorce feels very fishy.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, Melinda was like,
What the fuck is this
trying to
shit?
say that some of it was related to Epstein, but I mean, it's hard to know if that was really why or that was just a convenient excuse to cut the cord,
Mm,
Well, it's not like billionaires are the most truthful people on the planet. Um,
okay, so let's go therefore to his sweetheart deal, his first.
Alrighty, and that concludes part 3 of our listen through into the Whitney Webb interview. In about 30 minutes, we'll have Hotep Jesus Live for any of you who are not aware of. Please feel free to check that show out. It's on Kick. You will get a chance to see me on that show as I do the word of the day. We'll come back Tuesday again at 12:30 for part 4. We're close to wrapping up this interview. As you can see, this interview definitely is aging very well, especially with the recent events and the unfortunate killing of Charlie Kirk. When you listen to this interview and you listen to a lot of these things, especially in relates to Epstein and the questions that Charlie Kirk was inquiring in regards to the U.S., the Israel intelligence agencies, things start to become more and more clearer. So we'll continue this tomorrow at 12:30. Until then, if you're new to the channel, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, ring that notification bell, stay positive, stay focused, stay true, and much love.